Two voices meet at the edge of the line. One sees the ocean, the other the pine. Grounded in truth with a spark in their eye, they bridge the divide where the answers lie. Blue dot, red state, the stories unfold, where the heart meets the mind and the truth is bold. Different roads travel, but the same sky above. In the colors of discord, they paint with love.
All right, well, back again, everyone. Billy Mawhiney, red dot or blue dot, red state. Wow, definitely not what I anticipated to say today. Blue dot, red state podcast. I feel like I'm a blue dot in a very conservative state. That is not always the view of my guest. I have a special guest. Today's a different episode than we usually have. Usually we have guests that come on to talk about issues that are on their mind or issues that they would like for me to talk about a little bit. But today, I kind of sought out our guest today to learn and educate myself a little bit more. So today is going to be a different kind of episode. But Tony, introduce yourself.
Well, thanks for having me. First of all, Billy, it's a real pleasure. My name is Tony Kutayli. I'm from South Dakota. I'm from Sioux Falls. My family, just to give everybody a little bit of a background, considering the topic we're going to go through today. My family is originally from the Middle East. Both sides of my family originally come from Haifa and what is now Israel, but was Palestine. My grandmother was born in southern Lebanon, but raised in Haifa. I was raised in Beirut, lived in Saudi Arabia for a few years, and then in 1990, we moved to South Dakota, and my family has been there ever since. My father worked as a pediatric cardiologist at Avera in Sioux Falls for 30 years or so. My mother still lives there. My brothers went to the University of South Dakota Medical School. I went to high school and middle school and elementary school there in Sioux Falls. So, but once I went to college at Creighton, did my law school at UNL in Lincoln, and then went to Washington, D.C. and started working at the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, which was an organization started by Jim Abarisk, who's a former senator from South Dakota, who was a mentor and a friend. And then I worked in New York City for about a dozen years, working for a private family-owned investment firm, the Saudi family, the Oleon Group. And I left them in 2021 and have been doing my own consulting on the side of some other projects I've been working on ever since. So here we are.
Yeah. So definitely South Dakota roots for sure. Also wanted to just explain, we've had some technical difficulties, so that's why I'm on camera and Tony's not. We really did try our best, promise to get him on camera today, and then finally had to, for lack of, for the sake of time, to get forward. So the reason why, Tony, I kind of invited you, or not kind of, the reason why I invited you on and got you here is because in previous guests, they've been asking me questions about Gaza, and I don't have enough information personally. I see what news I have, right? I hear what news it gets filtered towards me. But I don't know enough information. And so I wanted to talk to people that were at least have a little bit closer ties and South Dakota ties, you know what I mean? That could kind of connect the two dots for me. So you talked about, I mean, one, you've been here since you came to South Dakota in 1990, but you were you said you were born in Israel and raised in Beirut. Is that true?
No, I was
Did I
actually
hear
born
that?
in Pittsburgh.
Born in Pittsburgh. I totally missed that.
No, no,
Where did
I
I
didn't
miss
say
this?
that, but I was,
Okay.
yeah, I was born here in the States. My parents were, my dad was
Yes.
born in Haifa. My mom was born
Yes.
in Beirut.
That's right.
Um, but they came here in the 70s. My dad did his residency and chief years here when he was younger, and so my brothers and I were born here in the 70s. But about 6 months after I was born, my parents decided to go back to Beirut, and so I grew up during the Lebanese Civil War.
Okay.
And we left Lebanon in 1987 and moved to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and lived there until 1990, and then came to South Dakota. And I think about 2 or 3 weeks after we moved to South Dakota, the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, broke out. And so the running joke in our family was that, we seemed to be, war followed us wherever we went. So my dad would look at us and go, just wait, South Dakota is going to secede from the Union. You guys will see. So,
Right.
yeah.
Ooh. Yeah.
Thankfully
Oh
that didn't
my.
happen.
Yes. Yeah. We're still part of the union for sure.
Yeah, of course. Thankfully.
Yeah. Well, yes, thank you for clarifying that. I had written down some fast notes, and obviously my scribble was not as clarifying as possible. But
No worries.
um, so one, maybe just talk about like how your connection is still there, right? And
Mhm.
then uh, we got to talk about October 7th at some point, right?
Sure.
So I don't know how we build that bridge to there. Maybe you can take us on that journey just a little bit, I guess is the best way to kind of get into that. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know how to get there.
Well, so I won't concentrate too much on myself because, I don't have any family in Gaza or the West Bank. Um, at least frankly that I know of. The truth of the matter is for a lot of Palestinians, especially, third, fourth generation Palestinians in the diaspora, is that as a result of the expulsion in 1948, a lot of history's been lost, a lot of connections have been lost. I mean, when I was working, just as an example, when I was working at ADC, the organization in Washington, I was about to go on a show to do an interview, and there was a gentleman from Bethlehem who was in the green room with me. And he came up to me and he started talking to me and he found out my last name and he started asking me if I was related to the Kutaylis that were part of a line of mayors in Bethlehem. And I said, I have no idea. I've never heard that before, So, my family had to escape. Both sides of my family had to escape in 1948. They were directly threatened. They had, the Zionist gangs and Israeli military basically went into their homes, told them they had 24 hours to leave and grab whatever they could carry on their backs. And essentially, they ran for their lives, thinking they would be able to go back. I mean, my grandfather on my mother's side quite literally built the house with his own hands. And
Oh,
we still have the deeds and the keys to the house. It's something he refused to let go of. He lived to be 102, and he refused to let go of it. He even actually in 1997, I think it was, he and my grandmother went with a church group back to Haifa, and he actually met one of the gentlemen who was living in the house, who welcomed him in, and they had coffee and actually offered to buy the house from my grandfather to make things right. My grandfather was over the moon at what a great guy this gentleman was, but had to refuse and refused because he said, look, this is my home. It's our land. It was taken from us, and I'm glad you've had amazing memories here with your family, and I'm glad that it went to someone who has made a home for themselves and their family out of it, made memories. But ultimately, I wanted this to go to my descendants, and I still believe that it belongs in our family. Um, so, point being, the the issue with I think a lot of Palestinians is, we don't often hear Palestinians talk about generational pain, right? You hear that a lot when you hear the term generational pain. It's often used more so in when it comes to, second and third and fourth generation Jews who are talking about their, grandparents or great grandparents who went through the Holocaust. Um, but for me, for example, I grew up hearing stories about Palestine, about what we lost in Palestine, what we had in Palestine, what life was like there, and how often my family had to start over. And it's because they left with nothing and went into, Lebanon, really, which eventually devolved into a civil war. I mean, they had to restart their lives 2, 3 times over because of wars and all sorts of other difficulties that kept coming up. And I think for the majority of Palestinians after 1948, that was the case. Obviously, for so many millions of them that are still in refugee camps and have been since then. And then, of course, you talk about 1967 and all of the other conflicts that have happened since then. I think, to get to where we are today in terms of Gaza, I think, we have to look at things in a macro view, first and foremost, just as the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as a whole, that this has been something that's been going on for almost 100 years. And it is a geopolitical issue that has been hijacked by just about everybody under the sun for their own reasons, whether that be, militants on the Palestinian side or militants on the Israeli side, or, Arab governments who are trying to hijack the Palestinian cause for their own reasons, or Western governments who pretend to be even-handed brokers in this when really they have their own objectives. So the Palestinians, unfortunately, have been pawns in this for decades, and have not really ever had much of a say over their own future. And that's also as a result, by the way, of their own leadership. I mean, they've had corrupt leadership for generations. So, I'm not laying blame at the feet of any one person, Um, so, what happened specifically, if we're looking specifically at Gaza, um, you know, up until October 7th, for the prior 16 years or so, Gaza was under a siege by the Israelis. You're often going to hear people say that, the Israelis had settlements in Gaza up until 2005. They pretty much were in Gaza until then. And then Ariel Sharon, who was prime minister at the time, pulled Israelis out of Gaza. He pulled the settlements out of Gaza. At the time, it was a really, big move for him to do in Israeli society. There was a lot of pushback. But the Israelis immediately started saying, look, we left Gaza alone. The Gazans now rule themselves. The Palestinians have their own way. They can do whatever they want. But that was never true. The reason being that even though Israeli soldiers were not inside Gaza, they controlled everything about Gaza. They controlled the airspace. They controlled the exits and entries into Gaza. They controlled the sea. They controlled how much water, food, medicine goes in and out of Gaza. They controlled everything. And by international law, Israel has been an occupying power in Gaza and the West Bank, and has, by international law, duties to the people it occupies, which it has been violating for all these years. And what ended up happening was around, I think it's 2007 or 2008, there was the Israeli government decided to put quote unquote Gazans on a diet. They restricted the amount of food that would go into Gaza so that it would be the least amount of food that would be able to get into Gaza without creating a famine. In other words, so that Gazans wouldn't starve. They calculated this out. It's out on the internet. I mean, anybody can go and research this and read about it. It was reported on, and it's not something that, quite frankly, I think the Israelis are necessarily trying to hide anymore. Um, and so that's when you started having tunnels being built. And initially, people talk about these terror tunnels. Well, yes, Hamas controls these tunnels. Yes, they created them. But Hamas took over because they were democratically elected. And once they were democratically elected, the Western powers that had set up that democratic election, that had certified it as being a proper and democratic election without interference, refused to work with Hamas and gave them ultimatums that Hamas did not accept. And so then there was a fissure, and Hamas and the Palestinian Authority at the time went to war, and Hamas came out on top in Gaza and had been ruling Gaza ever since. So, Hamas created these tunnels. Initially, what was being brought through the tunnels was everything from food to cars. They would disassemble cars and bring them through the tunnels and reassemble them in Gaza. So it was a matter of survival initially. But, that's not to say that weapons weren't brought in and money and that
Right.
kind of thing as well. So stop me at any point in time, by the way.
No, keep going.
So once you had this, I'm trying to set up the dynamic so that everybody understands, because, we keep hearing the same things from the same sides, right? Oh, the terror tunnels. Oh, we left Gaza. Oh, Gaza was under Hamas. Hamas is evil. And look, nobody has any real love for Hamas at the end of the day.
No.
Most Palestinians in Gaza up to October 7th, actually, when you look at polling, were not in support of Hamas that much. I mean, Hamas did rule very violently and did not. They were not, benevolent. They are an Islamist group. They do, have the way they ruled the way they wanted to rule, right? And a lot of Palestinians didn't want to live that way. But they didn't have much of a choice. And it wasn't just necessarily because Hamas was there, it's because Israel didn't give them a choice. And we know this because it's been widely reported. It's openly talked about in Israel. It's been widely reported in the Western press for sure, that we now know Netanyahu and the Israeli government knew for years that the Qataris were giving billions of dollars to Hamas and arming them. And he knew where this money was. He knew exactly what cars it was being brought in with into Gaza. He knew what suitcases it was in, and he was allowing it. And the idea was to keep Hamas strong in Gaza and keep the Palestinian Authority weak in the West Bank, so that there could never be a contiguous Palestinian state, and so that there would never be unified Palestinian leadership. He figured as long as the Palestinians were fighting amongst themselves, the Israelis would always have an opportunity to first and foremost claim that they didn't have a partner in peace, and second, could always, point to the chaos and say, how do you expect us to deal with these animals, essentially? Look at these people. And I say animals because that's what the Israelis call the Palestinians on a regular basis. I'm not coming up with that on my own. And you need not look no further than what Netanyahu said in his most recent video that he put out, I think, yesterday. And he put it out in Hebrew, which I think is very interesting because people tend not to notice when he speaks in English and when he speaks in Hebrew in these videos. And he spoke in Hebrew in this video and in very specific terms said, I worked very hard to stop a Palestinian state from happening. And we did it through several different means, and we should be proud of the way we did it. And one of the ways we did it was by increasing settlements in the West Bank through all these years, and we will continue to do so. I mean, the man just laid it out. Like, he's not even trying to hide it. Not that he ever was, but I think that's where we get to this cognitive dissonance, if you will, here in this country, where the Western press in this country, the legacy media, refuses to report on things that don't fit a certain narrative. And I think what you've started to see in the US is a lot of young people in particular watching Instagram, watching TikTok, watching even to some extent YouTube. But on YouTube, they're really getting unfiltered opinions and news from people and listening to podcasts, hopefully just like yours, and getting information that they otherwise wouldn't get from the legacy media, because the legacy media has always, towed the line, first and foremost, of the American government, particularly the Israeli government. I mean, if people can watch and notice that whenever Israeli spokespeople say something, it's taken verbatim. It is never, they never really truly grill these people. They never really question them. But when you have anybody who's speaking for Palestinians, not even on behalf of them, but trying to argue things from the Palestinian perspective, there's always a skepticism. There's always a certain attitude that comes across that's almost like, we have reason to doubt what you're saying, right? And so for us as Palestinian Americans, watching this, I mean, for me personally, I can't tell you how much my blood boils, all the time, because it gets to a point where, why are you not believing us when we've been saying the same thing for 77 years and nobody's listened to us? And, for example, the UN just put out a report officially saying that this is a genocide. You've had,
Right.
in Gaza, you've had every single humanitarian organization that's worth a note say it's a genocide in the last year and a half. All these other people say the same thing. And you still have people denying it's a genocide. Palestinians have been saying it's a genocide for more than 2 years. And yet, this is still a discussion. You can't use that word. You can't use that term, right? Like, don't use the word genocide. It's not a genocide. Well, what are we talking about here?
Um, I think when you talk about how we ignore it, or the simple term of just like turning the cheek, right? Of how we're just ignoring what's happening, and how, I don't know, we haven't paid attention in essence. And it's easy to look away. I don't know everyone's perspective, but I do know, coming from like a deep Midwest, like very conservative religious family, like the biblical tone of Israel, and this part of the world that holds this place, right? That this connection to essentially the Bible that we just don't want to touch, right? Like, I think there's something there about why we turn our cheek and turn our head to it. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but I think there's something there about why we don't want to talk about it and why we just ignore it. It's not in our backyard, and it's something we don't know enough about, and we're just choosing not to, because it's just too close to this, right? That we don't talk
So,
about.
and I completely understand that. And I've had so many discussions, especially with people from the Midwest, I mean, obviously growing up in South Dakota, um, especially after 9/11, so many of my friends after 9/11, I can't tell you how many would come up to me and say, look, I don't understand why they did this, right? Like, why did this happen? And I think this is part and parcel of the problem we have in the United States, which, as an American, I've always said this, to all of my friends, to anybody who wants to talk about any of these topics. We need to be more informed. We don't have a choice, right? Because, let me put it this way. I want to tackle the idea of it being biblical from two different perspectives. First and foremost, it's not biblical. And that's part of the problem, is that at least I should qualify that. It's not, the actual roots of the issue are not biblical. It can be interpreted as biblical, and it can be understood as biblical for certain people who are biblically minded, i.e., who are religious to a fault, who are maybe zealots to some extent, I'm thinking about, evangelical Zionists here. I'm thinking about Jewish Zionists who are religious fundamentalists, ultra orthodox to some extent, i.e., the Likud party, which is Netanyahu's party, for example. A lot of these people like Bezalel Smotrich, Itamar Ben Gvir, who are far, far right, hard, believing Orthodox Jews who sincerely believe in Greater Israel, which their sights are not just on the West Bank and Gaza. I mean, Greater Israel includes southern Lebanon, parts of Iraq, parts of Jordan. I mean, parts of the Sinai. Greater Israel would mean going to war with a greater part of the Middle East and gaining all that land. So if that's the biblical aspect of it, then we're not talking about this stopping anytime soon. You're talking about this going to war with the entire Middle East, essentially. But as an American, right, to say, well, this is biblical, I don't know that I really understand it and I really want to touch it. I understand that from the perspective that it is sensitive. But when your government has been giving the state of Israel $4 billion a year in aid consistently for, decades, and that is not including the sales of military weapons that we give to them yearly, and that is completely exclusive of the last 2 years, where we have been their exclusive backer and completely complicit in one of the most horrific genocides in modern history. We don't have the luxury of turning an eye or turning away and saying, well, this is too complicated for me to get involved in. We have a responsibility. We have a duty to find out more, to learn more, to understand what our representatives are saying, what they're doing, why they are taking the positions they're taking, why our government is doing these things, why they are taking these positions. I mean, with Biden in power, that administration facilitated a genocide. And whenever it was pushed, whenever it was consistently asked, this is against the very values of your party, it's against the very values of our country, it's against the very values of what we believe as human beings, of what we're, signed up for in terms of the Geneva Convention, in terms of the UN Charter, they ignored all of that. And of course, the Trump administration's that much worse. They just 2 days ago announced that they're sending $6 billion worth of arms to Israel, right? You're talking Apache helicopters, you're talking 2,000-pound bombs. And for what? For what? I mean, Gaza is flattened. There is no more communication in Gaza right now. The Israelis cut off complete communication. So I have friends in Gaza whose family have been starving, friends who've lost dozens and dozens of family members and friends who have no idea whether their family members are alive right now, and who have already been displaced, 10, 11 times, 12 times, who for months subsisted on, animal feed that was rotting because it was all they could find to eat. And you're going to tell them that, I want to see somebody look at my friend and say, well, I don't know what to tell you about your mom and dad. This is biblical. I just can't, I don't know. Hands off, like he's an American, he's an American citizen. Is that right? Does he deserve that? He's your fellow citizen. He's a human being. And so we can no longer afford that as a luxury as Americans. And, the world is becoming more and more and more interconnected. More and more, we rely on each other more and more. And these things, if 9/11 taught us anything, this is what I continue to tell people, especially post 9/11, is that everything boomerangs. Everything comes back. 9/11 was a reaction to American foreign policy. And the whole world has seen the double standard that America has put forward, that the whole Western world has put forward, not just America, by the way. Now, in the last couple of days, what have we seen last week? We've seen all these countries, these Western countries, recognize Palestine. And people want us to clap and cheer for them. look, do I think it's good that they've recognized Palestine? Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm happy. Do I sound enthused? No. Why? Because it doesn't mean anything. This is something they should have done decades ago, first and foremost. But more importantly, they're not doing this because they really believe in a Palestinian state. They're doing this to wash their hands of the guilt and complicity that they have in the genocide. Because Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the UK, of Britain, comes out and says, we're recognizing a Palestinian state, but I am making sure to say that they must be demilitarized. They will never have an army. They will never have an air force. Okay. What state that you know of would find that agreeable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and this is the other thing that, like, Israeli prime ministers always talked about a Palestinian state, but they want it demilitarized. They want to have some control over whatever comes in and out of whatever Palestinian state borders there are, meaning they might have control over whatever economy there is. They always insisted on having military on the borders, say with Jordan or with Israel or with Egypt and on the Sinai. So, okay. So essentially what you're saying is status quo. You're going to have an apartheid state the way they do now. You're going to control their borders. You're going to control their economy. What people in the world would agree to that? If we as Americans, would we agree to Canada coming in and saying, we're going to have control over your borders. We're going to put our soldiers on the southern border, the northern border, and California and New York and Miami, and we're going to control who comes in and out. We're going to tell you if it's okay or not. You can't have an army. You can't have an air force. And we're going to control over what goods and services you can do and have and come in and where your people come and go. But here, you can have a passport. I mean, these are the kinds of questions people need to start wondering about and asking. Like, what feasibility is this? How dehumanizing is this? And that's ultimately what this all comes down to, is Palestinians are not seen as worthy, right? We're not seen as worthy. We are not seen as human beings. And the proof of this is going to be when the dust clears in Gaza. Because whatever people think is bad about what's happened there now, they have no idea. I mean, there are some scholars right now that are estimating there could be as many as 600,000 dead in Gaza when all is said and done. And you're not even talking about what's left. I mean, the dead are going to be the lucky ones. Because what's left for those who are still living? Those who are the largest cohort of child amputees in the world. One of the largest cohorts of orphans in the world. Completely destitute people who have no opportunities for work, no society, no culture. They've bombed every single university, every single school, every hospital, every cultural center, everything. Everything's gone. They've wiped, they did this on purpose because they're trying to literally erase the Palestinians out of Gaza. And they're doing the same thing in the West Bank. There are 40,000 people who've been rendered homeless in the last, year alone by the Israelis in the West Bank. And you will see them annex the West Bank probably in the next 6 months to a year, if not sooner. So I apologize. I'm maybe going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I guess that to me is the issue, is that the biblical side of things comes into play when we start talking about people who are choosing to look at it from a biblical perspective and use that as a cudgel to stifle any other kind of discussion about the topic, right? And I'm not talking about people who are normal people who understand it from a biblical perspective. I'm talking about people in power who are talking about it as a biblical issue, right? What we need to continuously focus on is getting people to understand and realize that this is a political issue. Zionism is a political ideology. It's not a religious one. The founders of Zionism were secularists. They were not religious people. And they say this openly. Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, was a well-known secularist. He was not somebody who was doing this because he believed that the Jews needed to return for religious reasons. And And when you look at the quotes, even from David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, even he understood that they were settler colonialists. And that makes it a political thing. It makes it a geopolitical issue. It's not about religion. It's about, you had people who came to a land and started displacing other people. And, the way things played out, it became something that has transpired into a mess that we are still dealing with today. So
This was, well, to be honest, a very sombering conversation.
I
But
apologize.
but a very informative one. I really, really appreciate you just coming on and being vulnerable and sharing such vast knowledge, right? And a perspective that I guarantee a lot of people don't hear enough. So one, thank you for coming on and just being a voice that, again, doesn't get heard enough. And two, just being able to share that, and I think challenge folks to say, hey, let's start educating ourselves just a little bit more, right?
Yeah, and I want to say first and foremost, thank you so much for allowing me on here and for giving an opportunity for a voice like mine. We don't have that many, and so I really, really, really appreciate it. But yes, I think that if anybody wants to take anything away, I think that's what I would ask them to is, please. There's lots of information online. There are lots of people you can look to online. There are lots of books you can read. Um, Start with the 100 Years War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. Start with The Question of Palestine by Edward Said. I mean, like, I could list a whole bunch. Anything by Ilan Pappé, Norman Finkelstein. There's lots of information, and people, I just ask of you, just look into it and start small. Start small. Go online and just start small. So, thank you again.
No, thank you so much, Tony. And yeah, we'll we'll probably be talking soon.
I hope
I
so.
assume so.
I hope
Yes.
so.
All right. Enjoy your day.
You too. Thanks again.
Two voices meet at the edge of a line. One sees the ocean, the